Okay, we're ready to go then, Peter.
Yep.
Okay, what's the purpose of writing a report?
To communicate information to the various stakeholders.
Yeah, communication is exactly it. So, and that's harder than we would think. So we talked last time, and I made the comment, and I'll make it again. When it comes to specifying tree stuff, there's a tendency to want to shortcut it. The shortcut is protect the tree in accordance with the Australian standards, or prune the tree in accordance with the Australian standards, or work in accordance with the code of conduct, whatever it might be. And we put these very generic things in there. And this is one that came to my attention the other day, and the particular offending counsel hopefully has been depersonalised. But we wanted to know what the issue was with trees. Control F, tree, T-R-E-E. And there we are. All street trees and trees on private property that are under the protection of COL shall be retained except where council has given consent. Well, that's great. I think that's a wonderful thing. Just to the other side. We'll get through those ones. And tree preservation, all street trees and trees on private property that are under protection of whatever the council is, shall be retained and protected in accordance with AS 4970/2009. So there it is in a council document. It's not just private practice arborists that are lazy. It's all the way through. What the hell does that mean?
Pretty much whatever you want it to mean.
Yeah, the standard doesn't tell you how you've got to protect the tree, for example. It might mean that I decide in this instance that I want to go to 4 times trunk diameter all the way around it. And that might be acceptable. Or it might be that in this instance, I think it's appropriate to put paraweave around it, or nothing that says I've got to mulch it, nothing that says what size protection area or anything else in the standard. The standard says that's the part that we're meant to write. So we're meant to be telling people how big the protection area is, where the fence is to go, what sort of protection devices are in place. And I think I mentioned this when we did tree protection. There are things that I think are important. And we want to protect 3 parts of the tree, and only 3 parts of the tree. What 3 parts are they?
I think the roots are probably one of them.
Roots is definitely one of them. Often the least understood and most neglected parts are roots, yep.
What about the trunk?
The trunk, or let's go and let's talk about roots differently. The absorbing roots, the little bits that are taking up water, they're under 1 millimetre in diameter in most cases, well and truly under 1 millimetre in diameter. So they're very small. So those roots, and then the leaves. I want to protect the leaves because the leaves are important for providing food. Absorbing roots are important for providing water and solutes. And between those things, that's everything a tree needs. So it's got 2 absorbing systems. We have 1. We've got a mouth. Well, we've got mouth and skin. Skin can take in vitamin D and do a few other bits and pieces, but predominantly it's our mouth that takes in, I guess, air through our noses as well. We need air to break down, or oxygen to break down glucose and make it available as energy. So maybe we have 2, but they're all in that one sort of end of the world. Trees got 2 extremes, and everything in between is the 3rd bit. So we want to protect the leaves, we want to protect the absorbing roots, and everything in between. That's the ideal. That's a perfect situation. And that's where, we've got a 1/4 acre block and a tree in the middle of it. We don't need to do anything. We're not going to build a house. That's great. But beyond that, we do need to start specifying. So some of the things we can specify: trunk protection, branch protection, canopy pruning or canopy care. We can stipulate ground protection, so mulching, load sharing services, load bearing services, and the difference there. Load sharing, might take up to a tonne or so. Load bearing are things like your driveway. Your end driveway is a load bearing surface. The council road is a load bearing surface. It's made to have things drive across it and not compact the soil beneath. The damage that's going to happen is already completed in those items. And then we've got things like irrigation to consider. One of the big problems of cutting roots, and it's the biggest problem, So when we cut roots, we cut off absorbing components. It's the number one biggest issue. So we start to make water harder to get. And that, of course, is not necessarily the end of the world. We've discussed that. But it does have a physiological effect and a flow-on effect. So yes, very difficult to see it when a condition is written like this. How do you respond to that? So I pulled out the two conditions. All street trees on private property are, so I quoted what they are. Two arboricultural impact assessment reports were provided. Interesting, recommendations in these reports were not conditioned as a part of the consent process. So in this case, both arborist reports weren't particularly good, but at least they had some conditions. So in addition, after unauthorised works occur, the certifier provide directions that upon that a report is to confirm the following: the trees are healthy and stable, and provide tree protection measures in accordance with the Australian standard. The unauthorised works were the trees were cut in half and then cut in half by height. So that one half, the back half of the tree closest to the development was cut off, put on a neighbouring property, and then the trees were cut in half. So a little bit extreme, to say the least. And there's really not much you can say. It is important to note the standard is not a set of specifications and consequently offers no opportunity to determine compliance. I can't tell whether they're compliant or not. The only items for compliance are two vague conditions that council wrote, including the condition requiring compliance with the standard. So then I've just simply put the things I can say. The slab has been poured and cured and is now acting as a load-bearing surface. So that's good. And framing is now taking place on the slab. There is a good layer of mulch between the building and the rear fence. No storage occurs within the drip zone of the trees. And that's it. So I don't know what they want. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So it's difficult when someone says, protect the tree in accordance with the Australian standards. It's hard to know what the expectations are. And we've all done it. We've all communicated in this way. Certainly I have. So that just shows you, that's just in the last month, that it's not just public sector, but it's also private sector. This one here is another one that I'm currently doing. I'm back there again tomorrow. And they've got a whole pile of conditions. And the office copied all those conditions relating to the tree into a massive big table that was 9 pages long.
My phone's going to go flat.
Thanks, Brian. Just watch your phone. Brian, if you can hear us, you need to put your phone on mute. Put your phone on mute so we don't hear you talk.
Oh, okay.
Thanks. That's excellent. Thank you. So yes, we have a situation where we've got 9 pages of conditions, and I looked at it and I thought, oh, it's so convoluted, it's so complex. And so my first task was to figure out how to get those conditions down to 1 page rather than 9 pages. So yes, there's lots of other bits and pieces. All of these ones now have been completed. These are ongoing. This is to be done. This is what we're doing tomorrow. And again, no storage of materials beneath the tree or within tree protection zones, an ongoing component. Each time it'll say compliant as a thing. So it's just trying to get into something that's simple. The advantage of this is that the builder understands it. The builder did not understand 9 pages of conditions. It was just too much, too complex. So try and figure out how you can make things simple for the parties to understand, particularly when you're supervising tree work. So hopefully there's some useful bits and pieces. And for the last tips of the year, war of the year, hopefully if it's okay by you guys, I'll just go over a PowerPoint that I've been working on for this exact subject. Things around, slideshow. From beginning, and put you guys up here. Hopefully that'll sort it out. So we've got compliance words or doing words or verbs, whatever you want. They're the things that we need to do to demonstrate that we can do what we're meant to be doing. green words and knowledge areas, and those are the areas that we'll spend most of our time on tonight. I'm assuming that if you know what the things are, you can do them, but you may not know about them. So green are those things. Headings that are green relate to knowledge areas. Purple text is stuff that you need to be able to put into your own words. They're just examples that I've given, and that's what we're being asked for. Red is what you should avoid doing, and I'm certainly an expert at giving you examples of those. I've done enough of them and continue to make the mistakes. And pick the questions for you to answer. You don't have a workbook, so you don't need to worry about that. So we're asked to identify and prepare audit information, and there was a discussion that was had in our first discussion on writing an audit report about what information you need and how you get it. And one of the things that I thought I might share with you is a link, and you'll be able to go back and grab it, is this historic imagery. I don't know whether I've shared that with you before at a wall meeting. But let me just, I just did it over the PowerPoint. That was silly. No, I didn't. We'll see. But you've got access now to numerous historic images, particularly in the Sydney region. I'm sorry it hasn't rolled out broad spectrum yet. But you can go in and you can search by multiple dates, unlike the old 6 maps, which only has 1943. You can go back, sure, 43 is there, but you can start looking to see, oh, there's one in 1965. So, you know, how big was that tree in 1965? And you can go and have a look at that. So I'll just move this across so you can find the site easily. It's spatialnewsouthwales.gov.au. Spatial. So it's portal.spatial. So you can see the address up there. You can copy it down later on, or you can flick an email to Peter and he'll send you the link. But what is interesting about this is how humiliating my inability to age trees is. As I go back and I look, I realize that trying to get tree age sorted out is more difficult than I would hope. It's not as simple as I would think. And so not every year has been done yet, but there's gatherings all the way through it. So wherever you are in the Sydney region, at least, or the broader Sydney region, you'll find that you can get, you'll have maybe 5 or 6 or 10 different images over time that you get to. The plan is for them to have all of these completely digitized and made available. So I think that's pretty neat. So you can get a lot of information from that process. Now, it did overwrite my PowerPoint, so I've got to go back to that, and I apologise. I should have opened a new tab. Remind me if I go to do it again that I'm stupid. Slideshow from beginning, through it very quickly. Now it's going to be slow. Come on. Whatever reason it wants to save it now. Let's open up again. Let's try Google Slides. I've never tried it, so we'll see how it goes. Okay, that looks like it'll do the job. Will it? No, it won't. Okay, so we need to open this in PowerPoint on the web. Yep. That will open it. That'll work. And we want to go from this one here. So slideshow from current slide. Yep, there we are. Wants to save it again. Yep, okay, we'll go back to this one then. Close up and down, leave. Yep, that's done the job for us. Okay, so you should be able to identify and prepare audit information. What's the audit about? You know, what are we trying to audit? And sometimes that's never as clear as you'd like. So sometimes it'll be quite vague, as you saw. Go out and audit the development site. So I figured what was important, I figured important on that particular site was there was mulch, there was no storage going on underneath it, and the trees were healthy, even though they shouldn't have been cut back that way the bow. And then you can have a scope that's the broader outrange of what you're doing. So considering the impact of trees on development site, but you'll notice in that particular one, it asked for some things to be considered. One of them was whether there was storage going on. So sometimes they'll be focused on bits and pieces. Other times you'll do that just out of good common sense. The last thing you need is a big, long, awkward document that doesn't communicate well. So focus on the things that are important. Don't worry about the things that are less important. Just, you know, you might have some bullet points there and that's about it. Whereas your bulk of your report, or the key part of your report, should be concentrating on the key items. What part you're doing or what you're doing. So it's a site, it's a tree. You could be auditing tree planting, and you know, you might just decide that you're going to target a portion of the trees and do them randomly, or you might say I'm going to do every tree. And of course, identifying the documents. What specifications exist? How are things written? You need to be able to audit against something. So your audit process is whether it's random or whether it's going to be every particular item. That's somewhat up to you and the scope of what you've been engaged to do. So there's nothing wrong with doing random, more detailed inspections and very shallow inspections on others. And the sampling techniques, again, you can sample everything. You can sample randomly. The best way to sample, if you are doing portions, so you're doing portions of say trees, is to say, look, I'm going to inspect the soil moisture on every 10th tree. If you start doing it based on gut feeling, I'm going to check that one, I'm going to check that one, I'm going to check that one, your results will pretty soon not become random, and you'll introduce natural biases in, and that's okay. If that's what you want to do. I read a great little article about Araucaria columnaris recently. Michael from QTRA sent me an email. He said, you know, is it true that Araucaria columnaris bends its trunk towards the northern hemisphere or southern hemisphere if it's in the northern hemisphere? And my thoughts were, no, because I know a whole lot of them that face east. And so I thought I'd have a look at what the paper said, and the data showed that everything from east to west, but all to the northern direction in the southern hemisphere. That's what out of 120 odd trees they inspected. And then I went and found some pictures of Cook Island pine on New Caledonia, and I found a beautiful picture of two trees leaning towards each other. And I thought, no, that's not where the equator is, right bang smack in the middle of New Caledonia. So clearly, in their collection of data, somehow or other, they didn't find anything that was the exception to the rule. And
I think I've read that paper, Mark, and it did claim that that was the case.
It did claim it.
Do you
254 trees.
Do you think that most of those Araucaria columnaris do lean like that?
No, I think there's they lean, but I think we bring into research quite regularly biases, and I think that's one of them. When I was a young arborist, a gentleman called Paul Laverty proposed that they all leant towards the east. So that's not true either. And as I was driving back from the airport on Friday, having sent Mike Ellison the email the day before. I noticed one leading to the south, and I thought last time I saw the equator is definitely not south of Sydney. It might be, maybe there's a new equator out there. But that, I think, is a great example of just how we can bring a bias in if we don't do our research purely randomly. You know, we start, and Peter, a good example would be your routes. If you decided you weren't going to look at every route, but just some of the routes, you would find data to support one way or another.
I could easily pick out the one that supported my view.
Yeah, and there's a good discussion of this by a video journalist, Veritisium, who talks about the a poor application of statistics, particularly in psychology, and how that many things that we assume are correct based on analysis, you know, the t-value or the certainty values that we come from research are maybe not as reliable as we'd like, because again, researchers bring bias into the way they do things. So they might, for example, stop doing research when they get the results they want, or keep on increasing their numbers to get the answer they're wanting. So it may well be that those people collecting that data had 10 or 15 that were in the wrong direction and wanted to keep on going until they could support what they wanted, you know, mostly to the equator. And the graph that's shown from that paper shows it going in several directions, basically over 180 degrees, with nothing on the bottom 180 degrees. So it's you know, it's not the greatest research, but that just shows you all about sampling techniques and why randomness is important. Frequency and schedule of audit events. So you can go out and check things at a fixed time. You can say to your client, we're going to go out there on the 1st of every month or whatever day it is. My suggestion, I think I made this before, as random as you can. You know, we're once a month, and we're not going to tell you what day it'll be us arriving. There's two advantages. One, of course, is it increases flexibility in your program. The other thing is they're never prepared for it. And I always get a better picture of what's really going on in site. And I rocked up to a site the other day. I thought, oh my, if I'd come 2 weeks later, I would have missed it altogether. And there'll be peak points where you need to be on site, obviously, but outside of those peak points, random visits are far better. And if you can, try and get your agreements to allow you access at any hour. And if you can, even get your own lock on the gate. There is an advantage in that as well, and you'll figure that out as you do more of them. So you've got to get all the documents ready that you need. And as you saw that checklist there, that said it's 9 pages. I had 9 pages with a checklist on it. And I just went through each one of those conditions when I was there the first time. And I just as much hated going through 9 pages. So another advantage of a abbreviated checklist is it just saves you time from going through things. You know, you just need enough to say, yep, I know, and enough that the builder can say, I know what he's auditing. You know, oftentimes we put a lot of waffle into things. What's it doing? Yep. You might want to do some communication before you do your audit. Depending on what you're auditing, you may want to talk to various parties and say, hey, what's going on? What's happened? So that's important. So the terms objective, scope, and focus we've talked about already. An audit is just a simple, thorough examination or inspection, particularly in relation to an approved standard measure. So we're measuring against something. In our case, we're measuring against specifications or conditions. You know, 30 trees are to be planted. They're to be compliant with whatever the standard is. I can't tell you, I'm sorry. And they're to be planted at 6-metre intervals. Well, it doesn't take you long to be able to go out and put those few items down. Those are the things that we're going to go. What things might you want to audit in arboriculture? Anyone? We've given you a couple. Development sites,
The
tree
health of
planting,
the trees, what's been
a health audit, yeah.
If the excavation's been done correctly and in the places that were on the plans.
Okay, so is the work, so non-arboricultural works in relation to arboriculture, and that's a very important area, Vicky, in the unit where, you know, we really do need to think about how the things are affecting arboriculture, not just arboriculture itself. Yeah. So here's some pruning, tree protection, planting, numbers or quality of planted material. The scope is the extent of the limits. We're not there to do everything and anything. We're not there to tell the reader all the things we know about the subject. I like doing that. I tend to overdo things a bit. Just be careful not to do that. Focus, just to keep a narrowing of the scope. So the scope is the broader area. The focus allows you. So it could be particular, as Vicky just said, trees on the development site, in particular, the trees adjacent to the recent excavation works. Given you that already. Or assess the pruning work against AS 4373/2007, pruning managed trees with particular attention given to the volume of the foliage removed, the location and quality of the final cuts, and the prevention of damage to the tree by pruning techniques. I went out to a school recently and my job was to deal with the risk assessment, but I got there and boy, one Lophosamon confertus had 50% of the canopy removed. And at that point, I really need to say to the school, that sort of pruning has an effect on tree failures. So we shouldn't be doing it like that. Target operations defines the subject of the audit. For example, the location of the tree or the presence of a tree or protection devices. So documents that might be useful in undertaking an audit. Any idea? Standards, obviously, that's a no-brainer, and specifications, because we've said those.
What about the survey plans and the building designs?
Plans and documents, absolutely. They're very important things. Again, depending on the items that we're auditing. If you're doing a tree risk assessment, you don't need to be auditing for those. You're auditing for factors that you might have concerns about or targets that might be increased. Okay, documentation relates primarily to written standards and specifications as well as previous reports. And I made a note, you heard me say that there were 2 previous reports that had discussed specifications for the site, and I don't know why they weren't adopted. Both of them were fairly so-so, but any of them would have been better than what the council selected. So previous reports can be very important. Other written communication and images. Images can be really great, and Street View, Google, Near Maps. There's so many places now where images, Metro Maps, images are out there with information. Peter, do you use Near Maps up your end of the world at all?
I have done. These days I'm giving Metro Maps a whirl.
Yeah,
So
look,
their coverage,
Metro, go on.
their coverage isn't quite as good, but I find the actual application much easier to work with. I find Near Maps is really lumpy and sometimes difficult to get what I want.
Yeah, and look, I've used them both. At the moment, I'm not using Metro because they just continue to let me down in terms of frequency.
Yeah, that's probably their main drawback is their lack of frequency.
But their near infrared mapping is wonderful. I don't know whether you got it up your end of the world, but you pick plant stress up with it very easily. So that's a wonderful facility. If I had to do a plant health or a poisoning one again, I'd probably go back to using Metro for another year. It's more affordable than Near Maps. So there's some sources for some photographs. Frequency and audit events, we've discussed that. What things might you need to audit on a number of occasions? Some things will be just one-off, the pruning work that I just talked about. Iron goes out, has a look at some trees and says, yep, they're pruned, that's good work, that's no problems.
You might have to check that there's no building materials or etc. being stored under the tree more than once.
Yeah, more than once a week probably, if you're talking about the average building site. You might be looking at tree health. So typically post a transplant on probably maybe 20% of our transplants, we're asked to go back and monitor and see how the tree's going on a periodic basis. So that's an audit. So we're monitoring the health and the growth, the diseases and those things in that instance. Yeah, that makes sense. An audit event's just simply using something or doing something one-off. And of course, you can have a schedule of events. Typically on a construction site, for example, I want to be there just after they've got all the tree protection devices in place. I want to be there if they're doing demolition within a metre of a tree protection zone. You know, I don't have to be there the whole time. I said I'm happy being there sometime, but again, it's in bits and pieces.
Mark, can I ask, what do you do if they haven't alerted you to one of the hold points when you're supposed to be there and it's passed?
Oh, Vicky, I haven't got the answer to that. Some builders are slimy. How's that for an answer?
Yeah.
And there's nothing you can do. I mean, I recall once I was appointed as the project arborist in site in Holroyd. We've done the first one, we've done the sign off. We're on our way to do the next one, and we called them and said, look, we'll be there in about half an hour, just letting you know. And they said, don't come. So I said, well, I'm close enough already, I'll have a look. And the entire tree protection fence had been removed. And I thought, yeah, what do you do? If we're asked to be a project arborist now, we do ask that they appoint us in writing, sign and commit to it. But even then, I've got builders who would rather us not rock up to site ever. And, you know, I think that's just a nature of it. I've got others that are asking, why haven't you been there? You know, we haven't seen you in 4 or 5 weeks. And we say, month's not over, it's randomly within the month. You know, so you get both sides of it.
Okay, thanks.
And, you know, if I thought that something was happening, I would rock up to the site and have a look-see. So if you know, you're thinking the driveway's got to go in, and I did on the site that I'm at tomorrow, I drove past because I knew the driveway had to go in very soon. And they said, oh yeah, we've been meaning to call you. We're going to put that in next Tuesday. And I said, well, let's see what I can do about moving schedules around so that I can fit it in for next Tuesday. And I'm hoping when I get there tomorrow that they haven't started, or at least they haven't started in the area closest to the tree. But yeah, I think that's just the nature of builders there. They're also concerned about wanting to do things outside of what we restrict. And I think that's a part of where we've got to learn to work in with them and encourage them to be working with us on things. And sometimes, Vicky, we're, as a profession, we're very restrictive. And I would say that of arborists generally, but and certainly of municipal arborists, I would say they can be extremely restrictive on times. And so that tends to get this us and them mentality. So I think they're trying to avoid it. Mick's asked whether there's a logbook for tree protection zone. Mick, I just use a checklist. So I create a table, and each month I fill in the same thing. So I think I showed one earlier there. I would just fill that out every month appropriately. You know, it's not applicable, it's not applicable, it's applicable, it's applicable, and what's going on.
Do you leave a logbook at the in the construction office for anyone to fill in regarding incursions into the TPZ?
No, they're not going to fill that out. They're not going to incriminate themselves. I asked for an irrigation logbook to be kept on site, and I can say happily within the last 30 years, I've never seen one yet. So I don't think that's going to change. And realistically, whilst again, this is picking the battles, Mick. I pick the battles in that if I put my finger into the ground and it's moist, I've got to win. And some of the best, one of the best builders I deal with, Conquest, one of the project managers, his delight and joy is when he sees me to say, oh, I had the irrigation on for 2 hours last week. And I think, he stuffs up everything else, but irrigation is one of the key points to dealing with trees on development sites, for two reasons. One is it stimulates new root development, and two, cutting of the roots causes an inability to take water up in the same quantity. So adding water is the compensation for root cutting. And at the moment, it's just great because we've got all this wet weather over this end of the Australia. I don't know what's happening in Western Australia. It's a different country. But on the East Coast, it's wet. In fact, we're getting trees dying because it's wet. So at the moment, trees on development sites, not the issue. It's what happens in another 4 months, 6 months, 12 months when we go back into a dry period. We get, 2 months without rain. That's a hell of a lot for a root system that's stressed. So
as a project arborist, should you give them the logbook anyway in regards the duty of care?
look, I think giving them a logbook, it's not a duty of care. I think it's a way of encouraging them and getting them more organised. If there was something that I'd like to do with development sites more, it's an induction at the beginning of the process of getting people to understand, even if you could just do them a 10 or 15-minute video to watch as a part of their induction, or a 5-minute video watch as a part of their induction, that would be a massive improvement. And there is a guy out of Canberra, Steve, that's doing that on some of his development sites. Don't ask me how he does it. He's just got the gift of the gab, and he convinces them that's what they've got to be doing, and they're doing it.
But to comply with 4970, we give them the preliminary ARB report and then the impact assessment, and then perhaps we might want to give them some arboricultural specifications as well. So saying this is a logbook, it should be filled in every time there's an incursion, provided you've got permission from the project arborist for that incursion, and then maybe that's where your irrigation and whatever goes as well.
Yeah, so we're typically
inductions as well.
We've typically always got a major incursion on probably 75% of the sites that I work on. Major incursion being more than 10%. And I think it's possibly a good thing to get them to see that, but the scorecard that I'm going to give them is different than the scorecard they're going to give themselves, I think. But hey, Mick, give it a go, and if it works, and if people respond, and you can come back to us with saying, look, they typically fill it out, that's great. My dilemma is, if I show on the plan 8 fence panels going around a tree, I can say there's a 50-50 probability by the next visit there's 6, and by the last visit there's 3. I do have a 2-panel one where the guy got the excavator and bent the panels. That's my hero. And the only thing now that's left is 1 panel. Is getting someone to somehow or other wrap it all the way around with the excavator. So I think anything we can do to help them understand, but I think a part of that problem.
At least they've got a fence, Mark.
I do have photographs of one tree protection fence where they took the fence off, created a 4x4, so just 4 fence panels, and made it into their rubbish storage area. I thought that was creative. Yes, you're right, Peter, that 4 panels or 3 panels is better than nothing. But the ideal situation is not to have it just better than nothing. Catriona McKenzie did one in Ryde on Victoria Road in a big development there, and managed to get really good compliance. And the end result is the impact on the tree was just negligible. So I think if you can get it to work, it works well.
It's really difficult though when space on a site is so valuable to the builder, which is a major issue.
Yeah, I mean it is a problem, and I think this is where we as arborists have to be more flexible. And I'm not just talking about us as private practice consulting, but also public sector arborists. Things like site sheds can be put in tree protection zones and used as a load sharing surface. And yes, you might put a couple of concrete piers in, but boy, that's got to be a lot better than running trucks backwards and forwards over that space all the time. So,
Yeah.
you know,
I think I agree with what you said earlier. It's picking your battles. So trying to get stuff done that actually works and has an effect, and not worrying about things that might look good in theory but don't actually do anything much.
yeah. So a typical some whole points for a development site, just to give you an idea. After tree protection devices are in place, but before demolition work starts, at the completion of excavation within 2 meters of tree protection zone, just to give you a few, and then before cutting any root greater than 5 centimeters in diameter. Again, they're just whatever you deem as the things. I think it's good to have on a development site some critical checkpoints where you know that they're going to get you in. And I'm not saying that a 5 centimeter root is always going to be critical in size. That's going to be dependent on the tree and what's going on, obviously. We've already discussed what that material is. What stuff did we say might be important for our audit?
Plans.
Yep. Standards, yeah, we should all have a copy of the appropriate standards in our collection somewhere now. Specifications, so what was required, so conditions of consent or the things that they've got to do. And one of the things that most councils will now do is they'll publish the conditions of consent. That is, you can go online and find it. I'm amazed at how many builders will tell me that all I've got to do is just make sure that the tree protection fence is in place or something like that. And then you go and have a look at the conditions of consent and think, okay, no, that wasn't quite what you were meant to have. There's a whole pile of extra bits and pieces in there. So don't necessarily trust the builder unless the builder's given you a copy of the conditions of consent. And sometimes that condition of consent will say, refer to arborist report written by Peter Gray. And sit there and think, well, have I got that? And this is where it gets interesting, because whilst Peter wrote that report, he wrote it for another company who's got the approval and now sold the development on. And that can be difficult to find out what those conditions are and what Peter wrote. And if I phone Peter and say, look, Peter, any chance of getting a copy of that report? Peter's a total idiot to say, forget it. Not that he would necessarily, but
I usually do if somebody's genuine and has bought the project, and usually they've bought the right to those reports as well. So I'm happy to supply them.
Yeah, and I think that's the nice thing to do, but you don't always get them and they're not always available. So that can create a bit of problem. Codes of practice, if you're doing pruning work, you might be auditing pruning or pruning works, as in not just the end quality of the pruning, but the activity of pruning itself. Previous reports, aerial images, statements, things that people say. I'm forever amazed at what people say. I've been dealing with one recently where a person made a statement, made it to me, made it in writing, and now is recanting that statement. And I'm thinking, boy, people are silly. By the way, my daughter called me and said, I've got a very important thing for you to work for war today. It's rule 1. That is, no arborist should ever write a report where every word they know is in the first sentence. And she said that because we got a report the other day that was just unreadable. It took crazy to a whole new level. And there were lots of times where the arborist was adding words to make themselves sound very photosynthesis, and it just didn't work. It was just, I sat there and thought, I know. Side images and street view, every now and again you'll be lucky, or Google near map should be lucky and you'll get something. There's some standards that the unit asks us to look at. 2303 2018 for tree stock. and there's some, Ross Clark's done a good summary of some of the key information that's available at that link there. The only time you need to worry about this is if you're auditing tree planting. And interesting, most times on development sites, when a replacement tree is called for, there's not a reference to compliance with the standard. Interesting, our unit also asked for compliance with 223 1978. That's been replaced in 2018 with a completely different standard number. Soils for landscaping and garden use, in most cases, hopefully we're not using them, except in elevated beds. Most cases, the soils that we're dealing with in Sydney, in northern rivers in Australia, are generally suitable enough for gardening without bringing in extra material. Potting mixes, again, an odd standard for us to be dealing with in general, but I have done some rooftop gardens that required consideration, but in most cases we're not going to be. Oh, if we're looking at auditing a potting mix that's come in with some nursery stock, that may be still useful. Pruning of amenity trees, that makes great sense. We do a lot to do with pruning, and we really do need to get more familiar with that standard. I'll encourage you to read it, mark it up, make comments on the standard. There are things that are wrong with it, things that we're working at improving. Certainly more environmental pruning techniques will come into the standard. Protection of trees and development sites, you all know that's up for review. So there's going to be some changes with that. Mostly about trying to make things easier to understand, avoid those confusing repetitive use of things. Like, you know, what is the tree protection zone? Oh, and you said that I could protect that tree by putting a fence 2 meters out from the base of it. The standard says that I should be 6 meters out from the base of it. Where's the tree protection zone? It's both. So one's the indicative or the standard tree protection zone, the other one's the actual. I don't know what you call them, but they need to be differentiated in the standard. So things like that will get sorted out. There's a guide to managing risks of tree trimming and removal work by Safe Work Australia. There's a link there. Again, if you're
a risk to the tree worker or the tree?
A tree worker, but as an arborist, as a consulting arborist, particularly with a practical background like yourself, Peter, you may be called to go through and do an audit. And I have been asked on a number of occasions. It's a fun project to do, and it's something that arborists should do more often, is allow external auditing. Bad habits sneak in. And my favourite story is my young son was working with an arborist company, and I won't mention them to protect the name of the wicked, but he was I'd drop past on sites occasionally because I'd know where it's going to work, and I'd catch guys pushing logs in with their feet. Has anyone ever seen that? They grab a hold of the top rail and they push. And I would, as a typical concerned father, become ballistic and go off the dial about it and say, stop doing it. And about 5, 6, maybe 7 years ago, and several of you remember this, there was a gentleman in Carlingford who went through his chipper up to his thighs. And so I called the young arborist that I know, and I said, hey, are you guys all right? He said, yeah, why? I said, well, just a guy's just gone through his chipper up to his thighs. He said, oh, that's horrible. He said, I'll stop pushing logs in then. The problem was the boss was pushing logs in, and that just kept on going in the team. So
we've
again,
got winches now, Mark.
Yes, I know we've got winches, and that still causes problems. So yes, again, just because they've got winches doesn't mean that they use them correctly. And interestingly, there's issues with whole tree chippers, for example, as to whether you should be able to feed anything into a whole tree chipper or not. And so again, auditing of tree work might be internal. So Owen, if you've got guys working in the field, Mick, Brian, I don't know whether either of you have, but if you do have, or if somebody's watching this later on, it's perfectly good process to go out and do a random audit on your crews. How well are they complying against it? So there's an audit situation. Relevant state codes of practice, coroner's guidance and advice. Yeah, I hate to say it, but we still need to take it into consideration. Sometimes it's a little weird and wonderful, but at least you should take it into consideration. And Arboriculture Australia's minimum industry standards. Let me do a shout out to it as a set of documentation. In the earlier days, there was discussions about doing, best management practices for Australia. And I think very wisely, Arbor Australia said, no, we're going to do minimum industry standards. These are the things that you shouldn't go below realistically. These are setting the bottom end. Doesn't mean you can't do it better. Doesn't mean you can't do more. You just shouldn't be going below those levels. And they're fairly good detailed documents. They're not perfect. I know we'll go along in another 10 years' time and look back at them and say, boy, we should have tightened this up. We should have tightened that up. But that's exactly why it's a minimum industry standard. There's a tendency to suggest that things are BMPs or best management practice. And problem is when they fall way short, that raises real concerns. Pre-audit communications, there are times when you want to talk to people beforehand, ask questions. What's happened? What have you done? What's happened to the last arborist that was there? I'd have to say is one that I would have to ask, or at least the team in the office would ask once every few months at least. We're asked to go out and do a final sign-off, and you say, well, what happened to the arborist that was doing the inspections during the development? Oh, we didn't have one. Or we had an argument with them. We don't want them back on site, and that's a good flag for you. Emails, text messages, all those sort of things are all an important part of it, but just conversations on the telephone are important. Past arborists, council officers, again, the cities are usually quite willing to have you make a phone call and say, look, I'm just going out, I'm not comfortable with something, please let us know. So clients, you want to talk to them. Consent authorities, that's your councils in particular. Contractors, that's arborists, builders, plumbers, all sorts of people will tell you things. And I'm amazed at how many times even what's on site is not known by the project manager. So depending on the size of the project, witnesses to things, you may want to ask questions. So then auditing it is simply organising an on-site inspection. As I said, my preferred method is to say we will inspect monthly, and that's the organisation of it. The audit process, it's on a development site, it's random, and I will look at the key things. I'll close my eyes to things that aren't so critical. I'll give some guidance. So I went out to a site the other day. They've done the demolition works, no problems at all. The tree protection was in. They'd knocked down all the trees and they'd mulched all the trees into one of the tree protection zones, and it was 1.2 metres high around the trees. I said, look, that's not really what I'm looking for. Can we get that down by 1 metre? I'm happy with 200 mils. I'll, ride with 200 mils. Can we just drop the mulch level down by 1 metre? And I said, send me a photograph. I need it within the end of the week. Otherwise, I'll not keep your report out in time. And they went through and got it down and took a photograph. I didn't need to go back on that. It would be pointless. And I didn't need to make a note saying, I got there and the mulch was 1.2 metres high. I needed it rectified. So the critical thing for me was rectification rather than, oh, and I caught you out, you did the wrong thing, you're in trouble. They knew they were in trouble. That's, I don't want to point fingers or make people feel bad. I want them to feel good. I want them to feel that I'm working with them. So it was get it fixed up, send me a photograph, have it done in 2 days so I get the report out on time. Audit and tree work's pretty easy to deal, inspect. Now we want to look at the health, the structure, the environment and development works. There's a whole pile of things we're going to inspect there, a whole pile of things we're going to audit. You can audit against regulatory and legislative requirements, and we want to look at whether it's been compliant with those things or not. So, you know, what things do we have to do? And then we're going to record non-compliance and assess the extent and manner of non-compliance, and then document the findings. Okay, so assessing the impact of non-compliance, we've got to figure out how bad this stuff really is on trees. So non-arboricultural works impacting on trees or the work environment. We're going to determine impact of non-arboricultural works of contractors and stakeholders. We're going to provide some feedback, and I don't know why, but bits are missing in the presentation. So non-arboricultural works, Vicky, you talked about that beforehand. What's the building doing to the tree? What's the path done to the tree? What's the construction work done to the tree? And there we have a very different thing where we look at what information we collect. So, which is why there's some key checkpoints. For example, if you're excavating near a tree, when do you want to inspect? Going to put a wall in.
Initial excavation is a good time to be there, I find.
Yeah, as they're starting excavation and at completion of excavation, I want to know what they've done. I might not be there all the time if I feel that the guy doing the work with the excavator is able to do the job competently. So, you know, if he can dig and he knows that he's to be avoiding big roots, and, you know, he's a good operator, he'll leave larger roots if that's what's required, or he'll say, I've got bigger roots, I've found 5 of them, and he'll be able to tell me where. So again, depending on what's happening, if you're putting a solid wall in, then there's little else that's going to happen. You're putting a footing in that's 500 by 500. It's going to be either solid concrete or it's going to be concrete with roots growing through it. And I think I showed you some photographs of that a few months ago. Is that right, Peter? Did I show them?
Yeah, you did.
Yeah. Yeah. So depending on what your specs say, will determine what you're going to do there. Construction, building, trenching, shading is one that we need to think about on occasions. What does shading do? And shading may be negative or it may be positive. And I've taken a number of students out to see a car park in Susan Street in Auburn, and there's a heritage fig beside it at the council chambers. The heritage fig's on the southern side. It's being shaded by the car park. You know, not heavily, but it certainly is being shaded. And as a result, the tree is producing what we call shade leaves. Shade leaves are bigger and darker green, so the tree actually looks healthier, the shading, rather than the other way around. Grade changes can be a real problem. And it's interesting. I again, the site that I'm working on at the moment, got out there, the curb and guttering's going in. The curb and guttering's 300 below the finished level. And I said, so how are you addressing that remaining 300? And they said, we're just going to batter it down. I said, but that's where all the roots are. You're going to need to figure out how you're going to put a retaining wall in, not a batter. So that's difficult when you get a retaining wall close to a car parking spot, because of course you want to be able to open doors without the thing. So it's stepping back, and I'd rather have an extra 200 or 300 mils of cut than a 500 or 600 mil long batter. So yeah, things that you don't expect to happen. Landscaping is heinous on trees. And I remember a solicitor surname of Fox, if I remember, John is his first name in any case, who questioned me about it on a site, and he said, well, you know, they've got shown, they're shown planting 100 something rather odd plants underneath this tree. What do you think that's going to have as an effect on the trees? And I thought, boy, it's a huge effect. I said, but we could just simply put mulch down and put bromeliads in and achieve exactly the same thing. So again, we need to think about those things.
Can I just say, with the sort of the non-arboriculture, the opposite to shading is reflective heat as well. If you strip a green site and put down a big excavation into sort of reflected sandstone. I've had trees on the sites where they're outside the site, and I think they've cooked just through reflective heat.
Look, there's a great story of that, Owen, not so much with trees, but with cars in London, where one of the buildings with its reflective glass had a curve to it, and it actually became a concave mirror reflecting out like a magnifying glass, and it was melting plastic moldings on cars.
Yeah.
So I think, yes, certainly they can have an impact, and we need to be aware of those impacts. And there's a good example, again, of a non-arboricultural work having an effect on trees. In terms of landscaping, it's all those things. Vicky will be able to nod or not nod, but it's not uncommon for me to see a landscape plan that says rotary hoe to 150 mils in depth before putting down turf. And that's a nice set of specifications. Thankfully, landscapers are lazy, money-hungry people that don't do that. They just tend to put down a bit of turf underlay and roll out the turf and hope for the best. But again, it's in the specifications. And so the auditing landscape works, or you had a keen young fella, we'd have 150 millimeters of cultivating under trees. And in many cases, that's probably not going to do too much harm to the trees. Why? No, it's what they do through an orchard, isn't it? We'll often rotary hoe down the rows or rip down the rows.
Well, that's assuming that most of the roots are below that depth. But
yeah, there's a tendency for roots to be a little deeper in neglected environments, Peter. In neglected environments, where cared for mulch garden beds, you're going to tend to find that roots may become a little higher up. And I think you found in your trials that most roots were in about 500 mils of depth in terms of the lateral roots, not the single roots, obviously. Is that remember?
Yeah, more like 300, I think.
Yeah.
But
okay.
in that zone, yeah. So certainly, if you have an orchard and you cultivate, although a lot of orchards are using selective herbicides now that control the weeds rather than cultivation. But if you do cultivate regularly, the trees just get used to it and grow their roots down below that cultivation level.
Absolutely, and that cultivation often damages soil structure. It acts as an artificial mulching process, stop moisture loss. The other thing that they often do is sow with leguminous crops down those things to offset, particularly in organic farming. Organic farming is not necessarily the best all the time. Those of you who are listening that want to write me a hate mail afterwards for saying that, that's fine.
Well, it just means that you don't use chemicals, but that's all.
Yeah, and that's fine. So a WHS audit, we talked about that. That's something that particularly those that have come from the practical background should be prepared and happy to do more often. And particularly also afterwards in terms of dealing with work cover or coroner inquiries. Environmental audits. So looking at the dust, the noise, the drainage, chemical washout, and how they are impacting on trees. Certainly chemical washout is a big one on development sites. See lots and lots of people washing out concrete. Lime has an impact, causes change. And someone mentioned earlier, disease audits, biodegrade. So there's some feedback. We get all that information, and then what you want to do is you want to be able to write to the person and call them and say, look, mate, that's just crap work. And then go get bulletproof glass in your house and get a silent number. Or you've got to figure out, how do I leave feedback? How do I give feedback in a manner that's constructive, that's respectful? And so that's a hard process that we need to look at. So, I found, for example, that the quality of the pruning work on that site, where the council condition was poor, it was appalling. I wasn't even going to mention the pruning work because it was outside of my scope. Would have been nice to. The real frustration there was I couldn't do a proper audit. Clients, stakeholders, they're all different people. They're all different groups. And again, how we want to communicate with them will vary from person to person. If we're doing an audit with the builder, what's the thing that we most want from that builder more than anything else?
His cooperation when he's doing his job.
Absolutely. Favourable input into protecting the trees. What's the last thing we want?
Well, for him to get the
Shits with us
and just do things to spite you because he hates you.
Yeah, so that's this. We've got a difficult job here that we're sort of there to help them, but we're also in a situation where we don't want things to be ridiculous. I just noticed I'm turning very white on the screen. I'm just going to turn on a background light so it's not so bad. Maybe it won't look quite like Halloween. No, it doesn't. There we are. Don't want to scare you all.
Too late.
Thanks, Peter. So we're going to provide them some advice. And again, that's why I'm saying trying to pick the battles to fight is really important here. You know, you're not going to get to win every time. Sometimes, and I'll admit to it, sometimes I've been punitive in my behavior. That is, I looked at it and I thought, no, I've asked you to do things. You continually ignore me. So I had an example where they cut some roots on a jacaranda where they shouldn't have done, and I thought, that's it, I've had it. You know, it's just the whole time. So I said, oh, you'll need to get a tree motion sensor test, and that's going to cost you $9.90. And so that was just purely done to, you know, try and slow them down, stop them from doing the things they were doing wrong. It didn't win any friends, but at least I knew that the cedar tree that they cut the roots past, it was a cedar, not jacaranda, was stable, even though they'd cut a fair few roots. So, yeah, what impact from arboriculture would be the high priority things you'd want to get sorted out?
I think root severance is really important, that they've complied with what the specifications are for root severance.
Okay, so we've cut some roots. Now what do you want me to do, Vicky?
I want them to be wrapped and watered regularly and stick to that schedule, backfilled with the appropriate soil.
Okay, yeah, I'm fine with that. How are we going to get to do that? And that's often where the difficulties come in. So, for example, how do I get them to put some irrigation on? Soil's dry, irrigation should go on for at least 1.5 hours, or and get to the site. You've said that there should be a temporary irrigation system on. What have they got?
Garden hose.
Garden hose, yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, it might even be saying, look, go down and buy one of those black circuit hoses or the green circuit hoses, and at least a timer, and switch it on. And I have a punitive clause in my tree protection reports that says that if there's a substantial breach of a tree protection requirement, then we'll start doing weekly inspections to facilitate compliance. That's all. It's not about anything else, not about revenue, but it's pretty hard to get people to be compliant. So how do you best manage it? What ones do you pick? So yes, I think root damage is important, but I'd wager that we could probably let the ends of the cut roots dry out a bit, and it's probably not going to make a huge difference. I think it's important. And so I like putting in temporary hoardings. Root curtains out of hessian don't work. 2-star pickets and a piece of plywood adjacent with some site soil backfilling does an amazing job in comparison. And the dumbest thing, floral oasis. and a plastic bag does a reasonably good job. Cling wrap and floral oasis, same thing. Shove the floral oasis on the root. Why? Because it holds water. That's all. Okay, what other things are priority?
I think the pruning, how that goes is probably pretty important.
They've stuffed up the pruning. How do I fix it?
That's a problem because it's been done.
Yeah, and so a lot of these things that we're going to say, these are things you need to do, are not going to be things that are necessarily as time critical. So we're going to weigh them up. The one that comes to my mind at the top of my head is impacts with the trunk. If you impact the trunk, the quicker you treat, the better off you are. A partial break to the branch, a smaller branch, again, quick rectification can make a difference there. You know, if you happen to knock a tree over, they shouldn't have gone over a smaller tree, then maybe there's opportunity there. But most of the things that we're talking about, it doesn't matter how quickly it happens in things. If the tree's getting dry, how quickly should that be addressed?
Yeah, sooner rather than later.
Yeah, no mulch present, how quickly should that be addressed?
Sooner rather than later.
Which would you rather, mulch or water?
Probably water.
Yeah, water.
And so this becomes a juggling that we've got to think about when we're talking to people. In a perfect world, we'd say mulch, water, and so on, but it seldom isn't perfect. So a non-conformance is something that doesn't meet the criteria, standard, or specification that was given. And I don't think there's too much in the way of pruning work, tree work, transplanting, anything that I can think of that's to do with arboriculture that doesn't have some degree of non-conformance. Has anyone experienced otherwise? Great. So the next thing is trying to figure out the priorities, and we've got to look at that as well. So impact, I just want to read that first thing out. To consider the impact, we need to consider anatomy, physiology of the tree and the surrounding edaphic and environmental factors. In other words, how the tree is actually structured, how it's grown, what it does. Cut the roots, you have an impact on the foliage. Cut the foliage, you have an impact on the roots. Damage the trunk, you have an impact on the transport system. Ideally, we need to see trees from a systems approach and understand how impacting on one part of the system flows into other parts of the system. So in the context of arboriculture, if I cut the roots, what impact does that have on a tree?
Well, you're reducing the amount of water going to the
Water
system.
going up, yep.
You're reducing the amount of nutrients that the tree's absorbing. You're reducing the storage that the roots provide.
Storage, yep, good. So we've got
Possibly
several.
stability. If they're larger roots, it could be stability.
Could be stability, absolutely. And if we're at the stability stage, we're really getting touch and go. I mind. It's not that you can't stabilize the tree that happens.
You've got to cut an awful lot of roots to stuff up the stability, though, haven't you?
You do, yes, and usually closer than we'd ever think that you could go. And I think I've showed you pictures of that.
My view is that that's often overstated or overestimated.
Yes, we come from a precautionary position, and Maddox is very clear on that. I don't think there's any questions about it. So it's water has an effect on those things. Water also has an effect on the canopy growth. That's an important one to keep in mind, that when there's sufficient water going up, water goes up with solutes and hormones. And the hormones tell the upper portion of the tree to grow. When the upper portion of the tree starts to grow and sends sugars back down, it also sends hormones. That tells the root system to grow. And this is what we call the root crown ratio. When the root crown ratio is correct, the growing will be the seesawing up and down, up and down, up and down pattern. One of the really good indicators you can use when you're inspecting trees anywhere at any time is if the canopy is flushing, it's likely that the root system is functioning adequately. So if you're cutting off roots, one of the things you want to be looking for is the canopy flushing? And you can do this as an experiment. Go out, grab some basil from Woolworths, Coles, or from your favorite vegan supplier. Take a piece, put it into some nice propagating medium, coarse sand, keep it moist and watch. And it'll do nothing, it'll do nothing, it'll do nothing, it'll do nothing, it'll do nothing. And then all of a sudden it'll start to grow. At that point in time, turn it upside down and have a look at how many roots you've got. All the growth up until that time is largely concentrated on getting the root crown ratio back into order. Okay, so it holds back on canopy growth. There is no point in canopy growing if there isn't sufficient capacity to meet the need, water and solute needs of the canopy. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
So it's a really good little starter. Stored starches, you can go out and use a fluorescence meter. There's one behind my desk cabinet. Or you can go out and do an IKI test. IKI is just iodine and potassium iodide. And an IKI test will set you back for a whole pile of equipment that you need to do it about $100, I'm guessing. Would that be a fair guess, Peter?
Yeah, should be able to do it for that.
Yeah, a digital microscope, a Stanley knife, and some IKI is about all you need. And it's a pretty good indicator as to impact those things that have been having. Just simply seeing the canopy flush is a good starter. So it doesn't need to be complex a process. So we've got two absorbing systems, sunlight and carbon dioxide, water and solutes. And then we've got a transport system. We've got some really wacko transport systems. We've got a passive one through dead tissue. That's called the apoplastic system. And that takes water up, solutes up. Some trees it takes sugars up, that is the stored starches go up. And the classic one of that is sugar maple, Acer saccharum. We get maple syrup because they're tapping the xylem, not the phloem. And so stored sugars get turned into soluble sugars, so starch is broken apart very rapidly, and that's part of what pushes the system to drive it. So talk about that. There's the living system. In particular, the living system works in several areas. So this is parenchyma. Parenchyma can move things from the vessels and from the cell walls, the dead cell walls. So dead wood cell wall is made up of cellulose and lignin. That holds water. So you take water from there, you can take water from the vessels or the tracheas, depending on what sort of plant we've got, and it moves that water, those chemicals in and out. That's our radial parenchyma, so the rays, and up and down. And around most of our vessels, there are parenchyma. Tracheas, in about 13 to 16% of gymnosperms, there's also this axial parenchyma. Podocarpus, for example, is Podocarpaceae. It's commonplace. And then the phloem is a different system. It's really actively controlled. It's the master blaster combination. I know we've talked about that previously. It's the cell with the nucleus, the companion cell, and then these cells that are essentially zombified. They've lost their nucleus, but they're still functional, still working as though they're a living cell. And the sugar is moved actively by changing gradients, so it's moved upwards and downwards. You know it's moved upwards if you've seen a rose. The rose is at the end. We've seen a citrus. Citrus is a terminal flower. The citrus is at the end. To get all the sugars that needs to grow into a nice big fruit is done through active transport. Stuff's pushed out. The citrus does a little bit of photosynthesizing the fruit itself, very little. Most of it's transported. And that's why we say these things, and I hate the phrase, they're heavy feeders. It simply means the fruit use a lot of photosynthase, and therefore we need to make sure that the plant has good levels of solutes to address those issues. It's not that they're feeding through the root system. cerebronius. We've got an energy storage system. Peter, you talked about that. The Emilio flask and storage of starches, really important. And if you've not done IKI testing, just let the show. And Mick, I know you have. Peter, I know you have. Vicky, Owen, Brian, you played with the IKI testing at all? A little bit?
No, I haven't, no.
Yeah, look, it's a really good, simple process. It's a really neat little process to go through. Really useful if you were to try and quantify what sort of impact construction or transplanting or possum grazing or whatever it might be is having on the tree. The hormone system.
Sorry, do you need a benchmark to measure off?
Yes, ideally you'd work off a healthy specimen to compare it against, but you'll eventually get used to how much parenchyma, living parenchyma there is in a particular species or genus. So, for example, if I'm standing up a ficus, I expect it to go black. Avocado, I expect it to go black. Camphor, I expect it to go black. Brachychiton, I expect to have trouble to see anything else but black. So you get those eucalypts don't stain anywhere near as well. And I remember, Owen, my first time with Alex Shago, we collected, Scott Gatenby and I went over on that one, and we collected eucalypts from Los Angeles and then flew across with them to Boone and said, oh, look, and I couldn't find for the life of me any parenchyma that would stain. And I thought, well, maybe eucalypts are storing in a different manner. And it really did take a fair bit of time for my cutting and my microscopy skills to improve enough to the stage where I could see them. The reason you can't see them easily is that they've got these things called uniseriate rays, or rays that are just one cell wide. That's why when you look at eucalyptus, you don't see the rays. Look at casuarina or silky oak or oak, you see rays are everywhere. You don't see rays in pines. You see growth rings, but not rays again, because they're back to being uniseriate. And uniseriate rays means you need to make good cuts. And that's a part of the reason why it's not overly popular. It does take some skills to get a good cut, but I can typically do a eucalyptus sample, root, cut it probably a minute and a half, 2 minutes, and have a sample under the microscope for photographing. So it's pretty easy and straightforward, but it's practice. And I guess there may be 50 or 100 cuts to get to that stage of, just making it better and better and better until you get a nice, good, clean cut. Peter, you could get a good enough cut out of it without too many problems.
I have done it successfully, yes.
Yeah, it's all practice.
Yeah. But you just need to make sure that you've got a sharp tool and take care.
Yeah.
It's important.
Yeah, and then magnify it appropriately.
Mm.
You'll tend to find, because they're one cell wide, cells are very small. So trying to see it at 4 or 5 times is pretty hard. That's right. At 40 or 50 or 80 or 90 times, it's pretty easy to see.
Mm.
Trying to make thin sections a lot harder than thick sections, but thin sections aren't required. So we said hormonal systems that control things like reproduction, growth and defense, they're all important systems. One of the things you can get hormonally is, and we know this works with lots of things, is stressing can increase fruit production. Why?
Well, there's a school of thought that says that one of the tree's main jobs is to produce seeds so that it can reproduce, and if it's stressed, it needs to get on with that process. So it'll try that.
Absolutely, Peter. That's fascinating. And then I think I mentioned this before. Now you're doing things like grape production. Stress irrigation is a common form of irrigation where they stress one portion of the root system and irrigate another portion.
I think it's pretty common with some lychee varieties.
I'm positive, Peter, it's common becoming more and more common in lots of production. It certainly used to be common in apples, and if you're old like we are, Peter, you may have heard about people going at their apple trunk with a piece of 4x2,
Yeah.
or a whole pile of nails, because it has, and all they're simply doing is stressing the tree, damaging and injuring it, and that helps stimulate the hormonal systems. And there's some really neat little hormones out there. One of my favorite that I'm wanting to spend more time playing with is this salicylic acids, and they're interesting because you can't put aspirin around a tree. That's contrary to the label. That's just not acceptable. But you can spread willow, and there's lots of willow still being removed in places. So if you've got a tree, willow chip is something that we should value as arborists, not dislike. It actually stimulates the tree's natural defence system, and Bartlett Labs in the UK have been doing some really great work on that. So it's worthwhile, anytime you've got a willow to get rid of, is asking yourself, is there a stressed tree I've got, or is there a tree that's having some disease, biotic disease issues? Because there's a strong correlation between salicylic acid and the defence system of a tree. So salicylic acid is a hormone associated with that defence system. So we've discussed that. We may involve a brief summary, just a few key findings when you're giving feedback. It might be just simply a list of non-conformances that you give them. Again, that's going to be driven in part by what your brief is, and in part based on what your relationship is with the client. So those two things will come together. There are going to be some things that you're going to need to have them deal with immediately. Drying out of the cut margins, Vicky, I agree with you. If there's something that I'd like to stop, that would be one of them. And I know that can be resolved. I've had a large retaining wall demolished once, and I said, look, you're going to have to put some temporary hoarding in whilst you're doing the work to hold the thing in it. And they said, no, don't worry about it. We can have the new wall built in 3 days. I was amazed. I thought, boy, I often see excavation go on a development site, and they'll have that margin exposed for weeks. And it's about them thinking about their timing on things. So again, that's a hard process. We need to decide what is important and what other things need to be done, and that's really up to us. What are some words we might use to describe the different priorities? I've given you my first one: critical or urgent works. What might be some critical or urgent things you need to deal with?
Yeah, watering.
Watering, yeah.
Uh,
Remove stockpiling, put a fence back up.
Damage to the trunk.
Stem damage, yeah. As quickly we treat that, typically if we're less than 24 hours, we can really put a grinding halt to the impact.
Stop driving the B-double truck over the
Yeah. Putting in barriers to stop things coming in. So those sort of things really are urgent on the development site. Work that's essential. Yeah, you do need to do this. It's not optional. Okay, but it might be able to wait a week. Priority. It's a priority that you need to deal with. Again, these are just some suggested words. Not all work has got the same priority. I put the fence back up, stop the trucks going through there, put a load sharing surface down. That's critical. That's urgent. I rocked out to a site, that Susan Street car park, and they'd just driven an excavator across the buttress roots. It was only a little one, only a little 8-tonner. What do you think that did to the buttress roots? Took the bark off the top. I said, guys, get down a big pile of mulch, drive it across some track mats when you come back. That's urgent. Essential. That's getting those fences in place and the mulch in place. Priority might be getting irrigation on once every month. There's lots of stuff that's just simply going to be wait and observe. I don't know what the end result's going to be. Some stuff's just optional. It's there because there's a condition of consent that says you've got to do it. But from an arboricultural perspective, it may not be so critical. And then the stuff that's just simply too late. You know, if it's a flush cut, it's a flush cut. Can't undo it. And it reminds me of a project that I worked on for a while, and we audited the transplant, and everything that you could imagine went wrong. The builder turned off the water. Then when the builder realized the water was off, the builder turned the water on, and he realized the water was left on when the water started seeping up through the ground and it was floating across the site. By the time we got to about the third or the fourth month, our reports would say the tree is dead. And after about 6 months, the developer called us and said, we need to have a meeting with the landscape architect himself and a few other players. And they said, well, what are we going to do about this dead tree? I said, remove it. And without a joke, this is what the developer said to me. Isn't there some way we can make it come back to life? So, yeah, we need to be clear on when it's just gone too far. But there is this sense of belief that trees just, you can bring them back to life again. So again, dealing with that. And I noticed a chat comment down there again. Sorry for that. Yep, Amy's gone home. That's fine. I'll go home soon. Specify remedial action. And in this particular section of the unit, there's a requirement to do crap loads of this stuff. I'm going to flick through to it very quickly just so you can see some of those things. Remedial actions, not everything's fixable. We've discussed that. Important concept here, stress and strain. Stress is short-term recoverable. Strain is permanent. Now, permanent doesn't mean that the tree is dead. For example, a tree will go through strain, tips will die off, and we've got dead tips. I've got a great sample in my collection of a camphor laurel that was poisoned. I dare say after it had been poisoned, it looked pretty poorly. But by the time it had completely occluded over the poisoning sites and come back, I'm sure it looked pretty good. So when I say it's permanent, it doesn't mean that it's irrecoverable. It simply means that that damage cannot be undone. Okay, so stress and strain are two different concepts. You want to go through specifications. This is the last bit, and then we'll go. A standard is not a specification. All day long, let's get away from that. Prune to the Australian standard or protect trees in accordance with the Australian standard is wrong at so many levels. You know why it is. They should be detailed, precise and auditable. They should be auditable. If we can't audit it, then what's the point of putting it down as a specification? So that means they need to have some form of quantification or measurability to them. They need to be clear, and I've just said that, quantifiable. So here are some of the ones that they talk about. I'll go through them very, very quickly. We should be able to write pruning specifications. Prune tree to the Australian standard, probably not quite the same as raise the canopy of the tree to 4.5 metres to provide vehicle access, make the smallest cuts possible to provide the required clearance. They're two different things. Prune tree to 4.5 to provide clearance and prune to the Australian standard, not quite the same process. Pruning work should be performed by, and I've gone through that previously. Tree removal. We just think remove tree makes good sense. Move tree in front yard. Have I ever seen that in a set of specifications? I've seen that in specifications from cities. Prune tree, remove tree in the front of 125 Smith Street. What the hell did they mean? Did they mean the sort of tree it was would be nice? At least that removes confusion. Are we cutting it close to ground level? Are we grinding the stumps? How deep are we grinding? What's happening with the wooden branches? Remove resultant wooden branches, grind the stump, visible roots 15 centimetres below ground level. Rake up grindings and leave grindings mounted over the area ground. If we don't say, then they don't know. So we've got to be careful. And I told you, I shared with you, I screwed up recently. They removed the trees. I said, let's keep the mulch on the site. Where did the mulch end up? 1.2 meters around the tree. I didn't make it explicit. I should have realized that a builder would see a tree protection zone as a good storage site for mulch. Generally rake the lawn blade out of the past, note some small quantity of sawdust will remain. And then again, bits about things. And then in this case, I said the tree must be removed in small sections manageable by one person using an elevated work platform, no climbing permitted. That's what you want as an end result. You need to stipulate it. Okay. In most cases, you won't care. Tree support, brace tree. Oh, yes, I've written this more times than I'd like to remember. Install a 4-ton Cobra brace system with 4-ton shock units. Use inserts and abrasion sleeves around the stems. Install system at a fork a little over 2/3 of the height between the tips of the stem and the fork which the stems meet.
Sorry,
Ensure
Mark,
the rope.
why did you specify no climbing permitted?
Oh, there's just an example, Owen. So my preference is generally climbing does a better job when it comes to pruning or tree removal. But it might be, for example, that I wasn't happy with the stability of that particular tree.
Okay.
Okay, so there's no. Oh, sorry, Mick. It was Mick. No. Look, my view is, in most cases, I'll trust a tree rather than an elevated work platform for stability. Having had my elevated work platform have a leg tear off before it was 10 years old and go to one side, that was pretty scary. And there was nothing that gave us an indication it was going to do it, just went. So yeah, I'm cautious about elevated work platforms. Make sure there's sufficient reserves, install end caps with appropriate dates, provide clients with the maintenance and replacement dates in writing. A friend of mine was saying the other day, oh, the problem with Cobras is that nobody ever maintains them. Well, part of the problem with Cobras is no one ever specifies in the beginning that there is a maintenance cycle and that there is a use by date. So, for example, on Cobra, at 12 years, it needs to be replaced. It's a temporary system. And then there's some tutorial information and so on. And I keep on going through one after another. These are ones that actually came out of some reports. Provide AQS arborist reports, and in recommendations, accordance with 15, the report is to confirm the following. Provide tree protection measures in accordance with I've got no idea what that means. Does it mean I had to have a load sharing surface, trunk protection, branch protection? All of those are all good things, but I don't know that it means all of those. And those of you who deal with New South Wales legislation, we have a thing called a Complying Development SEP, State Environmental Planning Policy. And in there's a requirement to follow the standard. And I was in a matter before the tribunal, and a part of the argument was that they needed to install the fence at 12 times trunk diameter around the tree. And I said, I don't think that's the way I read the standard. The standard says that's the starting point, not that's what you've got to do. But if it is what needs to be done in this instance, the applicant needs to have because the applicant was complaining about the neighbour getting too close to the tree and so on. The applicant needs to have a tree protection fence going through their lounge room. If they agree to that, I'm happy to install it. Clearly, that's not what the SEP means, but again, this is this issue of communication. I wish it was easy, but it's never easy. And Peter, you might ask me to show 2 written examples of communication where just simply changing the punctuation make a huge difference. And I struggle with it all the time. And Peter's better at English than I am. And Peter says to me, "Oh yeah, I'm fine." And he sent me a document recently, and there was a word misspelled. It wasn't intentional. It was just we skip it. We read over it. Word didn't pick it up. Grammarly said, "Look at this, you silly mongrel! You've made a big spelling mistake." So yeah, even the best of us are going to make them. So I'm going to leave it there. We'll be back in January, I believe, Peter, is that right?
Yep.
November, I'm in America, so can't do it then. And I believe the Monday in December is very, very close to Christmas. It might even be Christmas, let me tell you. So I don't think we really want to be doing it then. Peter would be there, I know. It's Boxing Day. So I think we'll get a fairly low attendance on that day. So we decided that we'd skip December and come back in January.